The first rumor drifted through the lower decks of the orbital station like a cold draft. Something whispered too softly to be true, yet too sharp to ignore. People said an alien officer, one of the sleek uniformed patrol cast from the Central Coalition, had struck a human child in the marketplace. At first, no one believed it. Humans were new to the wider galactic fold, still labeled Deathworlders for being born on a planet full of storms, predators, and gravity most species found intolerable. We were watched carefully, judged quietly. And the idea that someone would lay a hand on one of our young seemed almost too reckless, too foolish, even for those who feared us. But the story grew legs. It ran wild. It reached every corridor, every mess hall, every quiet bunk. I caught pieces of it while heading back from maintenance duty. Someone mentioned a shout, a stumble, a flash of movement. Another repeated that the child had been shoved aside, disciplined, as the officer later claimed, for wandering where they didn't belong. No one gave the same details, but every version held the same unsettling shape. A child harmed. A uniformed authority. A crowd shocked into silence. What made it worse was that humans had spent the last decade trying to prove we could fit in with the rest of the galaxy. People worked hard, stayed polite, tried not to frighten anyone even when our strength and instincts made others flinch. Every council meeting reminded us of the same thing. Earn trust. Show restraint. Be patient. But patience snapped when it came to children. That was one line humans had never learned to compromise on. By the time the story reached me, it wasn't just rumor anymore. A quiet alert had gone out through the human channels. Nothing loud, nothing official. Just a message passed from person to person, almost gentle in tone. A child has been harmed. Stand by, and that alone made my stomach twist. Humans didn't stand by, unless they were preparing for something decisive. The station looked the same from the outside rings of steel. Windows glowing soft blue, ships drifting in the docking lanes like slow-moving lanterns. But inside, the air felt different, too still, too tense. People walked in tighter groups than usual. Some aliens kept their distance, unsure what was happening, but smart enough to sense the shift. Every species had its own instincts, and right then, theirs told them danger had come awake. I finally learned the child's name from a friend on shift. She said the kid was small, no older than 8 or 9, and had dropped a toy sphere that rolled under the foot of the alien officer. The officer accused the child of being careless, obstructing patrol traffic, violating station order. When the kid tried to apologize, the officer had lashed out, not a punch. Not a strike meant to injure seriously, but enough to knock them down. Enough to bruise. Enough to leave them scared and crying. Enough for a crowd to freeze, torn between outrage and fear of escalating things with law enforcement. Humans didn't freeze. Someone had recorded the moment on a wrist cam. The clip circulated within minutes. The flash of the officer's hand, the startled cry, the crowd's uncomfortable shuffle. You couldn't see much of the kid's face, only the shock in their posture. But you didn't need to see more. The message was clear. I watched it only once. That was enough. Afterward, every human on the station seemed to share the same quiet look. Not anger exactly. Something colder. Something steadier. Something that made the other species back away instinctively. It wasn't long before representatives from the alien patrol tried to issue a formal apology, insisting the incident had been misunderstood and handled according to protocol. They invited human leadership to a private meeting, hoping to smooth things over before the situation spun beyond their control. They hadn't yet understood one key truth about Deathworlders. Once you harmed a child, protocol meant nothing. The humans did attend the meeting, but not all of them. Some stayed behind, forming small, scattered clusters that worked with a quiet purpose. Maintenance techs who knew the ventilation shafts. Engineers with access to emergency override codes. medics who had seen too much in their lifetimes to tolerate injustice. Even off-duty transport workers began shifting around equipment, moving crates, checking tools, making sure everything was ready for something. I wasn't sure what it was at first, but I knew it wasn't vengeance for its own sake. Humans didn't lash out wildly. We responded. We corrected. We defended. The officer in question was placed under review, which was a polite way of saying she was escorted to a secure wing while the higher authorities debated damage control. But anyone who'd spent even a day around humans would have known that separation wasn't protection. By the next morning, the station's usual noise hum of lifts, chatter from merchants, thrum of engines had softened. People spoke in hushed voices. Patrols doubled without explanation. Human sectors stayed door shut. Something was brewing, and the galactic fold felt it. I found myself drawn back to the marketplace where it had happened. The floor had been scrubbed. The merchants arranged their goods as if nothing had happened. Yet the atmosphere held a faint echo, like a place remembering a storm. A small marker, placed quietly by someone, sat tucked beside a support beam, a tiny painted stone sphere like the toy the child had dropped. It rested in a shallow dish of dried flowers. No signs, no words. Just a quiet reminder. A passing alien paused near it and glanced at me nervously. Humans won't retaliate, will they? They asked. I didn't have an answer. Even if I did, I wasn't sure it would comfort them later that day. All human personnel were summoned by a simple message. Assembly at 1800. Mandatory. The words sent ripples across the station. Other species watched us move, some anxious, some curious, others clearly frightened. They whispered among themselves, guessing what would happen next. Some thought we'd demand justice. Others thought we'd withdraw from the fold entirely. A few suspected we might act in ways the coalition had always feared. The truth was, even we didn't know what the leaders planned. We only knew we wouldn't let a human child be treated like an inconvenience. The assembly hall filled quickly. Engineers, parents, traders, pilots, everyone stood shoulder to shoulder. The atmosphere buzzed with unspoken resolve. The human delegation entered last, walking with a calmness that seemed almost practiced. They didn't raise their voices. They didn't fan the tension. They simply shared the report from the investigation, explained the council's inadequate response, and stated what the coalition expected. Humans to accept. No one spoke for a long time after that. Then one of the leaders said quietly, "They believe we will simply forget." A murmur rolled through the crowd. "We don't forget," she continued, "and we don't let our children bleed for politics." Those words spread through the hall like sparks. Catching dry grass. The final message of the night was brief. Return to quarters. Wait for instructions. That alone sent chills through me. Humans didn't mobilize without purpose. When the hall emptied, even the walls seemed to feel the tension. Something had shifted, something irreversible. By dawn, rumors again swept the station, this time filled with panic. A patrol wing sealed off. A power fluctuation in a restricted sector. Human teams seen moving through lesser-used service passages. No alarms had been raised, but the quiet was worse than sirens. The galaxy had always called us Deathworlders. A name said with a mix of fear and grudging respect. But they had never truly seen what that meant. Not until now. I didn't know exactly what the others were planning. I only knew the officer who struck the child was no longer where the coalition had placed her. A trace of security logs hinted she had been relocated, though no one admitted why or where. Patrol authorities refused to comment. And humans. Humans said nothing at all. Then came the final rumor. The one that felt heavy enough to silence an entire station. Someone, no one would say hook, lamed the human. Delegation had requested an emergency. audience with the galactic fold. They were bringing something with them, something they intended to drop at the feet of the council. Themselves, no one knew what it was. No one wanted to guess. But by the time the chamber doors opened, everyone felt the same cold certainty. Whatever humans carried into that room, it would change the galaxy forever. And as I waited with the others outside, heart pounding, I realized this story wasn't just about one officer or one child. It was about what happened when the galaxy finally pushed humans too far, and the doors were opening now. The doors to the council chamber slid open with a slow, almost hesitant motion, as if the station itself wasn't sure it wanted to witness what was coming. A quiet ripple moved through the waiting crowd, humans standing steady, other species shifting nervously, patrol officers keeping a stiff distance. No one spoke. No one even breathed loudly. It felt like the entire station was leaning in, a massive body holding its breath on the edge of something it couldn't name. I didn't see what the human delegation carried inside. They were careful, almost protective, shielding it from view as they stepped through the doorway. The moment they vanished from sight, the doors sealed again, shutting the rest of us out. That single sound, soft but final, hung in the air like an unanswered question. Outside, whispers started immediately. What do they have? Is it evidence? Is it symbolic? Is it a message? No one knew. And that ignorance made every passing second feel heavier. The Galactic Council wasn't used to being challenged. They were used to species bowing, negotiating, compromising. But humans, especially after what happened to the child, weren't in a compromising mood. They were calm too, but there was something flint-hard under that calmness. Something the other species didn't yet understand. I stepped away from the crowd and found a spot near one of the tall windows overlooking the docking rings. Ships glided past in slow, graceful arcs. The view usually soothed me. But today, it only reminded me how small the station felt. How trapped we all were, waiting for an answer that no one could shape except the people behind those sealed doors. A small group of non-human workers stood nearby, whispering anxiously. They glanced at me with the same mixture of curiosity and fear I'd grown used to since the incident. One of them finally asked, voice trembling slightly, "Are humans going to change things?" I didn't know how to answer, so I just said, "Something changed the moment the child got hurt." That seemed to confirm their fears. They drifted away, murmuring to each other, their steps quick and uneven. The truth was, I didn't know the full story about the child either. I only knew fragments: how the kid had arrived on the station with their parent a few months earlier, how they loved wandering between the stalls in the marketplace, how their toy sphere was always in their hands, a bright little thing that beeped softly when tossed. I remembered seeing them once, laughing as the toy bounced around like a floating firefly. The memory only made everything feel sharper now. The officer who struck the child had a history, apparently. Not a violent one, at least not officially, but there were whispers of strict interpretations of rules. Impatience with species she considered less disciplined, and a certain coldness. Still, none of that explained what she was thinking when she acted. None of it excused it either. A human child, small and harmless, struck on a neutral station. It was more than an incident. It was a symbol. And symbols carried deeper weight in the galactic fold. Hours passed. The hallways outside the council chamber filled and emptied in waves as people waited, left, returned. No announcements came. No updates. Only silence. Eventually, I found myself moving through the quieter levels of the station maintenance corridors. Dim and humming softly with the energy conduits. Humans drifted here too, talking in low voices, checking consoles, making sure nothing unexpected happened. It wasn't a threatening presence. More like they were aligning themselves, waiting for a direction. One technician, someone I'd worked with before, pulled me aside. "The council wants this buried," he whispered. "They're scared. Not of us attacking or anything like that. They're scared of being seen as unfair. If they admit blame, other species will question every ruling they've made for decades. They don't want to lose control, so what are we doing?" I asked. He glanced down the corridor, checking for listeners. "We're reminding them that humans don't bend when a child is hurt. That we aren't." Quiet. I didn't press for details. Even if I had, I doubted he could tell me everything. There were too many pieces moving at once. Too many people involved. Too much coordination for a simple explanation. It was like a tide building silent, but unstoppable. When I returned to the main levels, the marketplace was strangely still. Merchants stood behind their stalls, pretending to organize their goods, but their eyes stayed fixed on the walkway where security officers gathered. The painted stone sphere remained where someone had placed it, untouched. A few alien children approached it out of curiosity, then backed away quickly after their parents tugged them aside. Fear had settled in the air, thick as haze. I overheard two traders talking quietly. They say the officer isn't in the secure wing anymore. Then, where is she? No one knows. Human patrol volunteers moved through the area, calm but vigilant. They weren't armed. They didn't need to be. Their presence alone made the message clear. We're watching. We're here. As the day stretched on, the council chamber remained closed. I found myself drifting back to the doorway more than once, drawn by the same anxious pull that seemed to grip everyone else. At one point, a representative from a gentle, long-lived species approached the sealed doors and pressed her hands together in a quiet gesture of hope. "May peace prevail," she whispered. But her voice wavered, barely holding on to the belief. Peace felt fragile. We all knew the galactic fold had never dealt with humans in a situation like this. They'd seen our determination, our creativity, our stubborn survival instincts. They'd seen us adapt, learn, integrate. But they hadn't yet seen how we reacted when one of our own Nespecie child was mistreated. They were learning now. Night cycle approached. Artificial lights dimmed. The station's steady hum softened. But no one slept. Hallways filled with restless groups of people sitting on crates. Leaning against walls, pacing slowly, checking their coms for updates that never came. Across from me, an older human sat cross-legged near a wall, eyes closed, breathing steady. When I passed him, he opened one eye and said, "This isn't about revenge." "I know," I said. "It's about respect," he murmured. "The kind you show and the kind you demand. The galaxy thinks we're dangerous because we come from a hard world. But they don't understand. Our strength isn't about fighting. It's about protecting." He closed his eye again, sinking back into quiet. As time dragged on, tension coiled tighter. Even those who didn't understand the political currents could feel something shifting, like gravity itself had tilted. Word eventually spread about what might be happening inside the council chamber. No one knew exactly, but the rumors painted a picture. Humans presenting evidence. Humans refusing half measures. Humans demanding real accountability. The council struggling to respond. The human delegation standing firm. And that mysterious item, whatever it was, resting before the council like a silent accusation. The longer we waited, the more the other species edged away from humans. Not out of hostility, but out of a deep, instinctive caution. They sensed that something larger than any of us was unfolding. Something that would ripple across alliances, trade routes, political structures. They just didn't know how big the wave was going to be. I ended up near the viewing deck again, staring out at the starfield. Tiny points of light scattered across endless dark. Beautiful, but uncaring. A reminder that the galaxy wasn't gentle by default. You made your own safety. You protected your own people. A group of young human cadets stood beside me, whispering among themselves. Do you think the council will listen? They have to. What if they don't? Silence. Finally, one of them said, softly but firmly, then they'll learn why we're called Deathworlders. There wasn't anger in their voice, just quiet certainty. The hours stretched on, and still the doors stayed shut. Patrol units shifted positions. The tension became something almost physical, pressing against the walls and air vents. Even the automated announcements sounded hesitant, as if unsure how loud they were allowed to be. Then, sometime deep into night cycle, a faint tremor ran through the deck plating. Not an explosion, not an alarm, just a vibration, like something heavy being moved somewhere deep within the council sector. People felt it. Everyone looked up. What was that? Someone whispered. Another tremor. Stronger. The council chamber lights flickered once, barely noticeable, but enough to draw gasps. I felt my pulse quicken. Somewhere behind those sealed doors, something was happening. Something the council couldn't hide. Something the humans had pushed into motion with quiet, unyielding resolve. The whispers rose again. Is that them? Did the humans? What are they doing in there? No one had answers. Only speculation. Only dread. When the tremor faded, the silence that followed was even worse than before. Heavy, expectant. Electric. People leaned closer to the sealed doors, straining to hear anything voices movement. Footsteps set, nothing came through. I stared at the doors, heart pounding, wondering what the delegation was doing inside. Wondering what the council was facing. Wondering what object humans had placed before them. And then one thought struck me with sharp clarity. Whatever humans were showing the galaxy, whatever message they were delivering, whatever moment was unfolding behind those heavy doors, it wasn't going to be forgotten. Because when humans finally acted, the galaxy always remembered. And now, with the lights dimming again and another faint vibration humming through the floor, I knew one thing for certain. The doors didn't open, not even a crack, but that tiny shudder passed through everyone like a cold breath. People straightened, whispered, held each other's sleeves without realizing they were doing it. Even the patrol officers on duty stiffened, their eyes flicking toward each other with the same unspoken question that hung in every mind. What was happening inside that room? I stepped closer, though there was nothing to see, just the closed panel of reinforced alloy, polished, smooth, and perfectly blank. It revealed nothing, reflected everything. A handful of humans stood nearest to it, unmoving, calm in a way that made others nervous. They didn't speak, didn't shift, didn't let the tension show on their faces. Their silence felt like intention. The other species kept their distance, gathering farther down the hallway, whispering in their own languages. Some stared at us like we were part of an unfolding storm. Others looked at the floor as if afraid to meet our eyes. One small alien child peeked from behind their parents' clothing, clutching a stuffed toy. When their gaze met mine, they flinched not out of fear of me personally, but because they could feel the atmosphere pressing around all of us. I offered a small, reassuring smile. It didn't help much. The tremor faded, leaving the air thick and unmoving. Minutes passed. Maybe ours. It was impossible to tell. The station lighting dimmed a little more as the cycle drifted deeper into artificial night, but no one left. No one dared. Finally, I moved away from the doors. Waiting without answers had worn my nerves thin, and I needed a moment to breathe. The station corridors were quieter than earlier, but still busy with groups of people talking in tense, low murmurs. Rumors were multiplying faster than anyone could track, and each one seemed more detailed than the last. Some claimed the humans had placed a recording device on the council table, one that captured the officers' words and actions in perfect clarity. Others whispered the delegation brought something symbolic, something meant to show the seriousness of the violation. A broken patrol badge, a damaged piece of the child's toy, a document demanding a public ruling, and one rumor, still soft, still uncertain, claimed the humans had brought the officer herself, escorted by unarmed volunteers who never once raised their voices. I didn't know which version was true. Part of me didn't want to know. Not yet. I wandered through one of the observation rings. Families gathered there, huddled close. Some children slept against their parents, unaware of how heavy the air had become. A few babies cried softly, sensing tension, even if they didn't understand it. Traders sat beside their crates, too anxious to return to their quarters. Even members of species known for their calm seemed restless. When I reached one of the wide windows, a familiar face joined me. A communications officer, a quiet person I'd spoken to a few times during shift rotations. They looked worn, as if they'd been awake far too long. "Anything from the council feed?" I asked. They shook their head. No public orders. No updates. Not even a restricted ping. That room is sealed tighter than a lockdown vault. A long pause stretched between us. "What do you think the humans brought in there?" They asked finally. "Something important," I said. "Something that forced the council to take them seriously." But what could it be? I looked back at the stars. I don't know. But whatever it is, the council won't forget it. They shivered gently at that. We stood together for a while, letting the view settle our thoughts. The stars didn't change. Ships still drifted by at their slow, steady pace. It felt surreal that the galaxy outside continued as normal while everything inside the station tilted toward something unknown. After a while, I made my way to the human residential sector. It wasn't restricted, but it felt different, today more focused, more guarded. Humans weren't hostile. They simply moved with purpose. Conversations were short, serious. Groups gathered around consoles, reviewing station maps or news feeds. Some checked on families. Others prepared supplies or sorted tools. No one looked panicked. No one looked eager. Either just ready. I passed a small cluster of older humans discussing the coalition's likely political reaction. Their voices carried fragments of larger truths. They'll try to claim it was an isolated action. They'll want quiet resolution. But humanity won't accept vague apologies. They need to understand that we can be part of this galaxy, but only if they treat us with basic respect. Another responded softly. "We didn't come here to dominate anything. But we're not here to be pushed around either." It was the calm acceptance of that idea, not anger, that made the words hit harder. The human community had always been patient. Always measured, always trying to fit into the galactic structure without stepping on too many toes. They had endured judgment, side glances, nervous questions about their origins, and 1,000 small misunderstandings. But harming a child, no matter the species, cut across every line humans recognized. It was universal. As I walked deeper through the sector, a group of younger techs passed me, carrying crates of diagnostic equipment. "Do you think they'll finally address the officer's actions?" One asked. "Depends how much pressure is inside that room," another said. Humans don't bluff, though. Whatever they're doing, they're committed. The third tech stopped, looking thoughtful. "It's not just about her. It's about how the council sees us." That comment lingered in the air long after they'd gone. Eventually, I made my way into one of the quieter rest areas. A few humans sat scattered among the seats, some talking softly, some sitting with hands clasped, deep in their own thoughts. One person was telling a small group the story of humanity's history with discipline and justice, how back on Earth. The concept of protecting children wasn't cultural. It was instinctual. Our entire species was shaped by danger, he said. We watched out for each other because we had to. You take a young one away from us or hurt one, and instinct kicks in harder than thought. His listeners nodded slowly, absorbing every word. "That's why the council is nervous," someone else said. "They know this isn't politics. They know we're reacting from a deeper place." The conversation drifted, but the message remained. Humans weren't unpredictable. They were simply guided by fierce loyalty. Later, I returned toward the council sector. The hallway was even more crowded than before, but quieter. People leaned against the walls, some sitting on the floor, waiting with the weary patience of those who had no other choice. Patrol guards exchanged tight whispers. A few council aides hurried past, pale and anxious. Clutching data pads they refused to look up from. The sealed doors remained unmoving. The tremor hadn't repeated, but the memory of it hung over us like a shadow. Behind me, a group of traders spoke in hushed tones about what might happen next if the council sides with the humans. "The patrol caste will rebel. No, they won't risk it. Not after the recording surfaced. You think the rumors about the evidence are true? I don't know. But humans wouldn't go this far without certainty." A soft voice joined them. "Maybe it's not about guilt or innocence anymore. Maybe it's about whether the council respects its own laws." That statement made everyone fall silent. Another hour passed. Then two, still nothing. The longer the wait dragged on. The more tangled the tension became, fear, mixing with curiosity, weariness layering over uncertainty. Even I couldn't tell which emotion sat strongest in my chest at some point. An announcement chimed overhead, but it wasn't the one anyone waited for. Just a reminder that curfew regulations were suspended until further notice. A sign that the council expected this ordeal to continue. I was heading back toward the viewing deck when I spotted a small alien child, the same one from earlier, standing alone near a bench. Rubbing tired eyes, their parent was a few steps away, talking anxiously with another adult. The child looked scared, unsure where to go, unsure what the tension meant. I crouched down, offering a gentle smile. "Hey, you okay?" Their eyes lifted to mine. "Are the humans mad?" they asked, voice trembling. I paused before answering. "Humans aren't mad," I said quietly. "They're worried. And they want to make things fair. Will they hurt anyone?" "No," I said firmly. "Humans protect. That's what this is about, protecting." They nodded slowly, then hurried back to their parent. The question lingered in my mind long after. Humans didn't want conflict. They didn't want fear. They didn't want to frighten the other species or start a war or tear apart delicate alliances. They wanted justice. They wanted accountability. They wanted the council an organization that claimed to represent fairness, to live up to its own ideals. But somewhere inside that chamber, a power struggle was playing out. And humans weren't giving ground. When I returned to the waiting crowd, the air felt heavier, like everyone sensed a shift, even if they couldn't name it yet. People stood straighter. Whispers sharpened. Even the patrol officers seemed on edge. The sealed doors still hadn't moved, but something behind them had. I could feel it, a decision forming. A confrontation tightening. A truth pushing against the walls, looking for a way out. And when that truth finally escaped, it wouldn't just shake the station, it would shake the entire galactic fold. The lights flickered once, just enough to draw every gaze to the sealed chamber doors. And the hallway fell silent again, waiting for whatever would come next. The flicker in the lights barely lasted a heartbeat, but it sent a wave of unease through the hall like a silent alarm. Every conversation stopped mid-sentence. Every footstep froze. Even the hum of the ventilation felt quieter, as if the station itself had paused to listen. The sealed council doors stood ahead of us, unchanged, unmoving. Yet suddenly more ominous than they had been all night. A low murmur rose at the far end of the corridor. People leaned in, whispering guesses, fears, half-formed theories. A group of council aides hurried past, their faces pale, clutching datapads so tightly the screens flickered under the pressure. None of them looked up. None of them dared to meet anyone's eyes. That alone told us the situation inside the chamber had shifted again. I stepped closer to the doors, drawn by instinct, by the weight of everything the humans had pushed toward this moment. The polished metal reflected the hallway behind me, crowds packed shoulder to shoulder. Humans standing in calm formation, other species clustered in uncertain groups. It looked like two worlds sharing the same hallway, but not the same understanding. A faint vibration rumbled under my feet. Not a full tremor like earlier, more like a pulse, a heartbeat, steady and distant. Some people gasped and stepped back. Others leaned forward as if to feel it more clearly. Someone whispered behind me, "Something's happening in there." Another answered, "Something big." The speculation came fast. Did the humans force a vote? Maybe the council is preparing an announcement. Or maybe the officer confessed. The last comment made several humans turn sharply, though not in anger. More in surprise. We hadn't heard anything about a confession. No one knew what the officer had said or done since the incident. And that silence, her silence, felt like a missing piece of a puzzle. The council was trying to hide. I drifted away from the doors, weaving through small knots of people. The tension in the hall had changed. It wasn't scattered anymore. It had direction, focus. Everyone sensed that the meeting inside the chamber was reaching a breaking point. The political pressure alone must have been unbearable. Humans didn't threaten or shout. But their presence, their stillness, had cornered the council in a way no other species ever had. As I walked, I overheard fragments of whispered theories. They're afraid of setting a precedent. If they punish the officer, patrol authority will revolt. But if they don't, humans will lose trust. The fold can't survive without Earth's partnerships. They underestimated how humans protect their young. Each voice added another layer to the tension, already choking the air. I found myself heading toward the observation deck again, needing space to clear my thoughts. The deck was dim, mostly empty. A couple of alien families sat quietly near the far wall, speaking in hushed tones. A few humans stood by the windows, watching the quiet drift of ships outside. One of them, a tall researcher I recognized from engineering briefings, spoke softly as I approached. "Stations like this were built for shared peace," she murmured. "Funny how peace always ends up needing courage to keep it standing." I nodded. "And humanity brought courage today. And patience," she added. "But patience has a limit." She didn't say the rest, but I felt it hovering, and the council might be reaching that limit right now. A chime sounded overhead, making everyone flinch. It wasn't an emergency alarm, just a generic system notice. But in the silence, it felt sharp enough to cut air. The automated voice announced routine station checks, no cause for alarm. Yet the timing felt deliberate somehow, as if the station systems were trying too hard to sound normal. The researcher gave a tight smile. "Even the station sounds nervous." When I returned to the main hall, the atmosphere had thickened even more. The crowd had grown, packed tighter, and every set of eyes was locked on the sealed doors. Patrol officers looked uncertain, unsure whether to maintain distance or brace for something unprecedented. A few council guards whispered urgently into comm units. They weren't wearing panic on their faces, but they weren't hiding worry either. Then came the sound. Not loud, not dramatic, more like a soft shift of weight on metal. A scrape, a quiet mechanical click. It echoed unnaturally through the tense hall, as if magnified by every ear straining to hear. Every person froze again. The sealed doors hadn't opened, but they had moved. Only a fraction of a millimeter, maybe less, but enough to break the perfection of their alignment. Enough to tell us that someone on the other side had touched the lock. Are they coming out? Someone whispered. A mother pulled her child behind her gently, protectively. A patrol officer stepped backward, not forward. Humans stood straighter, but not in a threatening way. It was more like they were bracing for an answer they had waited too long to hear. I felt the hair on my arms rise. Something, an instinct. A shift in the room told me that whatever was happening inside had reached the edge of control. The lights dimmed again. Then steady dot and a new sound filtered into the hallway. Voices muffled, too distant to understand, but unmistakable. Raised voices. Not shouting, more like a heated argument, trying to stay calm. A collision of authority and conviction on the other side of the wall. The crowd held its breath. I pressed closer to the doors. The words were impossible to decipher, but the tone was clear. Someone inside was refusing something. Someone else was insisting. And at least one voice carried that unmistakable human steadiness, quiet, unwavering, unshakable. A nearby council aide suddenly rushed toward the doors, only to be stopped by two guards. The aide whispered sharply, urgency dripping from every word. The guards shook their heads, blocking the way. That exchange alone sent whispers spiraling through the hall. Council orders. Are they losing control? Is the meeting breaking down? Humans didn't react. They simply watched, waiting. I realized something then. A detail that had slipped past earlier. Humans weren't worried, not the way the other species were. They weren't anxious or scattered or desperate. They were focused, united, as if they already knew what was coming. As if they had prepared for every outcome the council could offer. The silence stretched again. Heavier than before, a gentle hand tapped my shoulder. I turned to see an older alien merchant, eyes wide and uncertain. "What will the humans do?" they whispered, "if the council refuses them?" I opened my mouth to answer, closed it again. The truth was, I didn't know. No one knew. Humanity's responses were rarely loud, but always absolute. They didn't escalate, they concluded. They didn't provoke, they defended. They didn't attack, they protected the vulnerable with a determination that made the galaxy admire and fear them in equal measure. I think, I said slowly, they'll do what they must. The merchant swallowed hard, nodding shakily. Footsteps sounded beyond the doors. Firm, deliberate. Not rushed, not panicked, not indecisive. A calm, measured pace that traveled from one end of the chamber toward the entrance. Then another set of steps followed, lighter, hesitant, nervous. A third set joined, heavier, slower, dragging slightly. The hallway tensed into one silent, bracing mass. Even the air felt like it stopped moving. The footsteps reached the other side of the door. A faint, metallic shift. Sounded someone placing a hand on the interlock mechanism. Every heart in the hall thudded once in collective anticipation. One of the humans nearest to me inhaled slowly, eyes fixed forward. Another reached out, resting a steadying hand on a fellow human's shoulder. A nearby alien child whimpered quietly. Clinging to their parent, the lock clicked. Not fully released, just a subtle, partial motion. A warning. A sign. A whisper of something about to unfold. And in that instant, the entire hallway went completely silent. No whispers. No shuffling. No breathing, nothing. Just the quiet hum of a station waiting for its world to change. The doors trembled, a faint vibration traveling through the frame. A pale line of light appeared along the seam, thin as a hair, bright against the metal. The crowd inhaled in a single, unified breath. The way people do when lightning strikes too close. The seam grew wider. A sliver of the chamber beyond came into view, only a narrow shape of dim overhead lights and the faint outline of silhouettes inside. I leaned forward, pulse hammering against my ribs. And then the doors stopped, frozen, half-locked, half-unlocked, suspended in a moment that felt impossibly fragile. A low, strained sound echoed from inside the chamber, a voice, weighted with something I couldn't name. It wasn't fear. It wasn't authority. It was something deeper. Then came a second voice, human, steady, calm, and whatever words it spoke made everyone around me stiffen as if in awe. Invisible hand had tightened around the entire hall, because we all knew one thing with sudden, absolute clarity when those doors finished opening. Whatever stepped through them would decide the fate of the entire station, and maybe the entire galactic fold. The seam of light brightened, the mechanism clicked again. The doors shuddered, and then everything went still, holding us on the very edge of the moment before the world changes. The doors finally slid open, not with a crash, not with force, but with a slow, steady motion that seemed almost ceremonial. A wide beam of council chamber light spilled across the hallway floor, bright enough to make some people lift their hands to shield their eyes. Everyone, human and alien alike, stood frozen. 3 figures stepped out. The first was a human representative from the delegation, walking with calm purpose. Their expression wasn't angry or triumphant. It was solemn, focused. The look of someone who had carried a heavy truth for too long and finally set it down. The second figure was a council official, their posture stiff, strained. Their hands clasped small data pads filled with rushed notes, and their gaze kept dropping toward the floor, as if they couldn't meet the crowd's eyes. They looked shaken not by fear of humans, but by something deeper. Something like shame. The third figure stepped out slowly, hesitantly. The alien officer, the one who had struck the human child in the marketplace. There were no restraints. No guards pushing her forward. Just her own quiet steps, shoulders lowered, face drawn tight. She didn't look defiant or proud or defensive. She looked like someone who had finally been told a truth she never expected to hear and now had to stand under the weight of it. A ripple of whispers moved through the corridor, but the humans nearest me didn't move. They didn't glare at her or step forward. They simply stood there, steady and unshakable. Their presence like a living reminder of what had brought us all to this moment. The human representative turned to the crowd. Their voice, when it came, was firm and clear, carrying easily through the hall. The Galactic Council has reached a decision. Those words alone sent the entire hallway into silence again. Even the ventilation hum seemed to soften. The council officials stepped forward next, clearing their throat. "The officer has admitted wrongdoing," they said. Their voice trembled slightly, but they continued. "And the council has agreed to fully review the patrol protocols that allowed this incident to occur." Gasps rippled through the crowd, shock, disbelief, relief. Some whispered to each other in stunned tones. For the council to admit a mistake publicly was rare. To commit to changing their own policies was almost unheard of. The human representative spoke again, gentler now. "This is not about punishment alone. This is about safety, respect, fairness for every species, human or otherwise." The official nodded quickly. "The coalition will issue a formal apology and ensure that no child of any race is ever placed in harm's way by a patrol officer again." The key words that had circled for days: justice, accountability, protection felt like they finally fit into place. But there was one more thing. The officer stepped forward herself. Her voice was small, almost fragile. "I have agreed," she said, "to speak directly to the human community, to listen, to learn, to understand where I failed." Some people shifted uneasily, not out of fear, but because no one expected her to face humans willingly. publicly, but she continued anyway, taking a shaky breath. I cannot undo what I did, but I can change who I become. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't long, but it was honest. And in that honesty, the tension in the hall softened not fully, but enough that some people exhaled for the first time in hours, as if the whole station had been holding its breath. Then the child's parent appeared, stepping through the doorway behind the delegation. No cameras followed them. No crowd parted dramatically. They simply approached with quiet dignity, their expression tired but steady. The officer lowered her head the moment she saw them. The parent spoke softly, loudly enough for those near the front to hear. My child is recovering. They are safe. Sighs of relief spread gently across the hall. But what matters now, the parent continued, is that we build a station where every child is safe, human or alien, visitor or citizen, all of them. Those words carried more power than any council ruling. The officer nodded, swallowing hard. I understand. The parent's voice softened, though their posture stayed firm. Then begin by hearing us. Hearing this community you are part of. Not above, not outside, but part. The officer nodded again slowly, genuinely, for the first time since the rumor had started spreading through the station. I felt the tension ease, not vanish, but shift into something more hopeful. Humans didn't want to dominate the galaxy or control the council. They just wanted fairness, decency, real accountability, and the crowd around us seemed to understand that now. The council official stepped aside then, signaling that the meeting inside the chamber was over. Humans and aliens alike moved forward in small waves, not to confront, but to talk, to ask questions, to understand what had happened inside. I didn't push into the crowd. Instead, I slipped away to the observation deck once more. The station outside looked the same as it always did, drings glowing softly, ships drifting like slow-moving lanterns. But it felt different, like something heavy had finally lifted. A few minutes later, a familiar figure joined me. The research engineer I'd spoken to earlier leaned against the glass, arms crossed loosely. So it's done, she said. Looks like it, I answered. Not perfect, but progress. That's usually what justice looks like. She let out a soft laugh. Humans didn't come here to scare anyone, she said. We just came to build something better, and maybe remind people what we stand for. She nodded. We didn't drop a threat at the council's feet. Then she paused, smiling faintly. Just the truth. I smiled too. Sometimes that's heavier than anything else. The engineer took a slow breath, letting the quiet settle between us. There'll be changes now, she said. Real ones. The Fold can't ignore this, and the officer. She'll learn, the engineer said softly. Humans will make sure of it. Not through punishment. Through understanding. We stood together for a moment, looking out at the stars. Ships glided past, their lights soft and steady. The galaxy hadn't changed overnight, but it had shifted just enough that people might start treating each other with the care they claimed to value. Word spread quickly through the station. People talked about what the humans had done not with fear, but with respect. The story reached the markets, the sleeping quarters, the engineering bays, the classrooms. It wasn't told as a warning. It was told as a lesson that humanity wasn't dangerous because of strength. Humanity was dangerous because of loyalty, because of the fierce dedication to protect even the smallest among them. And that loyalty, used with steady hands and patient voices, could reshape entire systems. Later that night, the little painted stone sphere in the marketplace was surrounded by fresh flowers, not just from humans, but from members of half a dozen species. Some left small toys. Some left notes. Some simply stood there, bowing their heads, The child's parent came by too, gently picking up the painted sphere and carrying it away with quiet care. The message was clear now. The station had heard. The council had listened. The galaxy had learned something important. Humans weren't just Deathworlders. They were protectors. And in a galaxy full of cold space and fragile alliances, protectors were needed. As I walked back through the soft-lit corridors, I felt a strange sense of peace settle in. The conflict had reached its end, not with destruction, not with fear, but with understanding and change. The sealed doors, once symbols of silence and tension, stood open now. People passed in and out, talking openly about policy, fairness, and safeguards for all children. No matter their species, it felt like a fresh chapter. A better one. And as I returned to my quarters, tired but hopeful, I realized something simple and true. Sometimes, the strongest force in the galaxy isn't power or technology or tradition. Sometimes, it's the quiet, unwavering courage of people who refuse to let innocence be harmed. And this time, humanity had shown the galaxy exactly who they were. Not Deathworlders, Guardians, and the galaxy would not forget it.